You were probably taught this in a room with low ceilings and bad lighting. Maybe it was a Sunday school class. Maybe a children's Bible with illustrated pages. Maybe just a sentence from an adult who said it so automatically you never thought to question it. Jesus was a carpenter. That was the answer. Complete, sufficient. You nodded and moved on, the way children move on from everything adults deliver with enough certainty. And there was a picture to go with it. A man in robes holding a wooden plank, strong hands, simple clothes, a quiet village, a modest workshop, a life of humble preparation before the ministry began. Nobody told you what that life looked like. Nobody said, "Here are 18 years of it." Nobody asked you to wonder what happened between the 12-year-old boy in the temple and the 30-year-old man who walked out of the desert and changed the world. You were given the beginning and the end, 2,000 years of theology between them. And the middle two sentences, "My name is Nathan. Some of you have been here before. Former history teacher, 12 years at a Catholic school in Indiana. Resigned in my early 40s when the questions I was asking became professionally inconvenient. The question that eventually cost me my job didn't start with me. For 11 years I taught at St. Augustine's without ever being asked the thing that finally stopped me. And then a 14-year-old boy named Marcus, second row from the window, mostly interested in basketball, raised his hand in the middle of a Tuesday lesson on the timeline of Jesus' ministry. He said, "Mr. Nathan, what did Jesus do between 12 and 30? I said, "What teachers say when they need a moment." I said, "That's a great question, Marcus. Let me come back to that." I never came back to it. The bell rang. 45 minutes, 28 students, onto the next class. But that night, driving home through the dark Indiana roads, I kept thinking about it. Because in 11 years of teaching, I had never asked myself that question. I had taught the birth, I had taught the ministry, I had taught the passion. I had never once looked at what sat between them and asked why it was empty. When I got home, I opened my Bible to Luke chapter 2, verse 41, the temple episode. Jesus at 12, staying behind without his parents' knowledge, sitting among the teachers, listening, asking questions. The teachers are amazed at his understanding. His parents are beside themselves. When Mary confronts him, he says, "Did you not know I must be in my Father's house?" That scene, rendered fully, specific details, dialogue, emotion, you can picture it. And then, immediately after, verses 51 and 52, "Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them, but his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man." That is the complete official record of 18 years of a man's life. 47 words in the entire Gospel of Luke, covering ages 12 to 30. I read it 4 times. I read it a 5th time, slower. Then I put the Bible on the kitchen table and sat there for a long time. Marcus had asked the right question, and in 2,000 years of church history, the answer provided was 47 words. Nothing. Think about the last time someone gave you an important account of events and left 18 years out of it. Not a gap in a minor record, not a missing footnote in a secondary source. The official biographical account of the most discussed human being in the history of Western civilization. 18 years of his formation. Every teacher who shaped him. Every conversation that became a parable. Every experience that entered his language before a single public word was spoken. 47 words. The church has had 2,000 years to explain this. 2,000 years of councils, theologians, encyclicals, scholarly journals. 2,000 years of the most powerful institution in human history, with its full resources pointed at understanding the life of Jesus. And the result for 18 critical years is 47 words and the assumption that nothing worth knowing happened. At some point, that assumption stops being plausible. At some point, the absence of explanation becomes its own explanation. The first thing I did after that Tuesday was look at the word carpenter. Most people don't realize that the word the Gospel of Matthew uses for Jesus' trade is not carpenter in the original Greek. The word is tekton, from the Greek tekton, and tekton doesn't mean carpenter the way we use that word today. It means craftsman, a skilled worker in hard materials. In first century Galilee, the primary building material was not wood. Timber was scarce and expensive. You built in stone when you could. The Greek word tekton applied equally to woodwork, stone cutting, and metalwork depending on where the work was. John Meyer, a New Testament scholar at Notre Dame who spent decades reconstructing the historical Jesus, in his 4-volume work, A Marginal Jew, writes that tecton, in the Galilean context, almost certainly included work in stone. He estimates that craftsmen of this class were skilled itinerant workers who traveled to wherever the construction was. Not sedentary villagers, not men who worked from a fixed shop in the same town their whole lives. Workers who went to the work. Now here's why that matters. The image you have, the humble carpenter in a quiet village workshop shaping wood with his father, waiting patiently for God's call, is a translation artifact. It was built on a word that means something broader, and it was built to create a specific portrait of origins. The portrait of a man too rural, too simple, too disconnected from power to have formed himself through exposure to the world. But tecton in Galilee, in the first 3 decades of the 1st century, wasn't a quiet trade. There was a city being built. You know the story about Nicholas Notovich. Or if you don't, you should, because it tells you something important about what happens when people desperately want the gap to be filled. In 1894, a Russian journalist named Notovich published a book in Paris. The title translates as The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, subtitled From Buddhist Records. Notovich claimed that during a journey through Tibet, he had broken his leg near the Hemis monastery in Ladakh. While recovering, he discovered a 2-volume Tibetan manuscript. A monk read it to him through an interpreter. The manuscript was called The Life of Saint Isa. Isa, identifiable as Jesus, had traveled to India between the ages of 13 and 29. He studied in Bengal. He preached in Orissa and Rajputana. He debated with Brahmin priests. He returned through Persia. He arrived back in Palestine in time to begin his public ministry at 30. The book sold instantly. English edition, German edition, Italian edition. By the end of 1894, every literate person in Europe could read about the spiritual journey that filled those 18 years. Max Müller, the era's leading authority on Eastern religions, wrote a response in the 19th Century magazine that December. He contacted the abbot of Hemis Monastery directly. The abbot replied, "There was no such manuscript. There never had been one." A scholar named J. Archibald Douglas traveled to Hemis Monastery the following year. He spent time there. He interviewed the head lama in person. His report, published in the 19th century in April 1895, was unambiguous. The head lama told Douglas that no Western visitor had come to the monastery in years before Notovich's alleged visit, that no manuscript about Isa existed, that the entire account was false. Notovich, in a subsequent edition, allowed that he may have embellished, a polite word for fabricating a historical document and selling it to an international readership. The hoax spread so quickly and was believed so readily because people needed it to work. The gap was real. The silence was real. And a private journey to India gave that silence a meaning. A deliberate journey, sacred formation in hidden temples, an education so extraordinary that it justified keeping it quiet. That story made the absence feel like mystery rather than erasure. It was false, every detail refuted on site by a scholar who actually made the journey. The real answer is not in Tibet. It's 6 kilometers from Nazareth. When you've spent time following sensational theories that turn out to be fabrications, there's a specific deflation. Not just disappointment, something more particular, a recognition of how much you wanted the exotic answer, and what that wanting reveals. Because the wanting itself is accurate, the silence is real, the gap is real. The questions Marcus asked that Tuesday in October were the right questions. You were right to sense that something was missing. The exotic answer was wrong. The real answer is closer, and in some ways that's more unsettling. Richard Batey's book is called Jesus and the Forgotten City. Batey was an archaeologist who spent years examining 1st century Galilee. He published with Baker Academic in 1991. The Forgotten City in the title is not in India or Egypt or Persia. It is a city called Sepphoris. Sepphoris was the capital of Galilee. In the first 3 decades of the 1st century, it was the most important city in the entire region, a cosmopolitan center built in the Greco-Roman style. Theater, colonnaded Main Street, ornamental fountains, paved roads, sophisticated water systems, mosaics on the floors of the villas that archaeologists have been uncovering since the 1980s. Its Roman nickname was Autocratoris. Herod Antipas gave it another, the Jewel of Galilee. It was 6 kilometers from Nazareth. 6 kilometers. In the geography of the ancient Near East without automobiles, that's roughly 90 minutes on foot. Visible from the hills above Nazareth on any clear morning. The kind of distance people covered every day for work. And here's what Batey found. Herod Antipas began the massive reconstruction of Sepphoris around 4 BCE, immediately after the death of Herod the Great. The previous settlement had been largely destroyed in a revolt, and Antipas needed a capital suitable for the ruler of Galilee. The project was enormous, thousands of workers, decades of continuous labor, the construction of an entire Roman-style city from the ground up. This project was running in the year 0. It was running when Jesus was 5 years old, when he was 10, when he was 14, when he was 20. The reconstruction of Sepphoris was ongoing for the entire span of years the Gospels describe in 47 words. Batey's argument is this. A tekton, a craftsman from a family in Nazareth, would have been among the workers contracted for a project of that scale. There was no comparable construction work anywhere else within walking distance. Josephus, who documented the entire region in detail, records no other significant building project in Galilee during those decades. The work was in Sepphoris, and the work was exactly the kind a tekton would do: stone, foundation work, setting columns, everything that goes into building a Roman city from scratch. Eric Myers, an archaeologist at Duke University who has led excavations at Sepphoris for decades, has said that the reconstruction of the city during this period would have required skilled labor from the surrounding villages. Nazareth was the closest. The connection is not speculative. It's what the historical geography of the region suggests. Now look at the parables. The teachings of Jesus are saturated with the language of urban commerce, not village economy, not subsistence farming, urban commerce. The owner who hires day laborers at the gate at the first hour, some still waiting at the third hour, some at the sixth. And at the end of the day, everyone receives a denarius, and those who worked 12 hours resent those who worked 3. The landlord who leases his vineyard to tenant farmers and goes on a long journey. The tenants who beat the first messenger, then the second. The violent dispute over rent and ownership. The merchant who finds the pearl of great price and sells everything he has to buy it. The man who owed his master 10,000 talents, and the servant he later choked for owing him 100 denarii. These are not the stories of a man who grew up in a village of 200 people and never left. These are the stories of a man who had watched foremen and laborers and landlords and merchants operate in real time for years, who had been the man waiting at the gate, who had watched others be paid more and said nothing, who had seen exactly how the Roman economic system pressed down on ordinary people from a position of ordinary proximity. Where did he learn this? Batey's answer. Every morning from his early teens to his late 20s, he walked to Sepphoris. He worked alongside Romans, Greeks, Jews, Syrians. He watched the city being built. He saw the foreman who controlled the day's work and the laborers who waited to be selected. He heard the disputes over wages. He understood from the inside what it felt like to be subject to a system not designed for you. And then, when he was about 30, he stopped walking to Sepphoris. He walked into the desert instead. Think about that for a second. Jesus mentions dozens of places by name in his ministry: Capernaum, Bethsaida, Chorazin, Magdala. He refers to cities repeatedly in his teachings. He moves through the entire geography of Galilee in the Gospel accounts. He never mentions Sepphoris, not once. Not in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Not in a saying, a parable, a passing reference, a single sentence. The capital of Galilee, the city visible from the hills above his hometown, built during his entire youth. Complete silence. Batey wrote that this is the deafening silence of a man who knows exactly what he's not saying. Either Jesus stayed silent about Sepphoris deliberately. To name it would have been to invite a question he was not prepared to answer publicly. Or the institution that preserved his words understood the implication and maintained the silence that he himself had maintained. Either way, the silence is there. In every gospel, in every text, in every account the church ever handed you. Stand on the hill above Nazareth. Look north. 6 kilometers away, a city is being built. The scaffolding is visible on a clear morning. The smell of cut limestone if the wind is right. The sound of mallets on stone. Greek and Aramaic mixing in the morning air with the Latin of the Roman overseers. Every day, the workers walk north. They walk past the olive trees and the scrub grass. They arrive at the gate where the foreman is already waiting with the day's assignments. Some of them have worked here for years. They know which foremen are fair and which ones aren't. Among them, possibly, a young man from Nazareth. He is learning to lay foundations in the Roman style. He is watching the engineers calculate load and stress. He is standing next to men who own nothing and watching them negotiate for what little they can get. He does not write any of this down, but 20 years later, when he stands in a synagogue and begins to speak, the vocabulary that comes out of him is this city's vocabulary. The day laborer, waiting at the gate at the first hour. The landlord who went on a journey. The man who owed 10,000 talents. He knew these people. He had worked beside them. There are 2 more pieces I want to show you because together they form something important. The first is Josephus. Flavius Josephus was the most significant Jewish historian of the 1st century. He documented Judea and Galilee in extraordinary detail. Wars, revolts, political figures, religious movements, construction projects. He wrote about Herod Antipas. He wrote about Sepphoris. He wrote about the execution of John the Baptist. He mentions Jesus twice. The first reference is the famous Testimonium Flavianum in Antiquities 18, chapter 3. For centuries it read as an enthusiastic endorsement of Jesus as the Christ, praising his miracles and celebrating his resurrection. The problem, which John Meyer documented in A Marginal Jew, and which Bart Ehrman at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has argued in multiple works, is that this passage does not appear in its current form in any manuscript until after Eusebius quotes it in the 4th century. The scholarly consensus is that Josephus wrote something about Jesus, but what he actually wrote was far more neutral, and at some point, most likely when Constantine had made Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire, the passage was improved. The second Josephus reference in Antiquities 20, chapter 9, is considered authentic by nearly every scholar. It reads, "The brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James." That's it. That's the complete, authentic record. 12 words. The most discussed human being in the history of the Western world receives 12 authentic words from the most important historian of his era. Either Josephus didn't think Jesus was as historically significant as he would later become, or the historical record has been shaped more substantially than the official version acknowledges. Both possibilities are uncomfortable. The second piece is the Dead Sea Scrolls. In 1947, a 15-year-old Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Ed-Dib threw a stone into a cave opening above the Dead Sea while looking for a lost goat. He heard something crack. Inside clay jars. Inside the jars, leather scrolls wrapped in linen. He had found what would eventually be identified as nearly 900 manuscripts dating from 250 BCE to 68 CE, the oldest biblical manuscripts ever discovered. The writings of the Essene community at Qumran, a group of desert Jews who practiced ritual washing, communal living, and the expectation of apocalyptic transformation. Scholars have noted since the scrolls were first analyzed that John the Baptist's practices, desert preaching, ritual immersion, apocalyptic urgency, closely parallel the Essene communities. It is not impossible that the man who baptized Jesus was formed at least in part by this tradition, that what Jesus encountered in the desert at 30 was already partly known to him, not as doctrine, but as atmosphere. The scrolls were assigned to an international team for publication in 1953. By 1985, more than 30 years after discovery, fewer than a quarter had been published. The rest remained locked behind access restrictions available only to the assigned team. In 1991, the Huntington Library in California, which had acquired photographic copies years earlier, released the unpublished photographs to the public over the explicit objection of the Official Publication Committee. 44 years between discovery and accessibility. I'm not making a conspiratorial argument. Scroll publication involves genuine technical complexity, but when the oldest biblical manuscripts ever found are kept from the general scholarly community for nearly half a century, the question of why doesn't seem unreasonable to ask. Now, Benítez. J.J. Benítez spent over 40 years investigating the historical Jesus. He visited Israel more than 15 times. He combed the historical sources, the archaeological records, the rabbinical literature, the Josephus texts, the geography. And in the fourth book of his Kabbalah de Troya series, the volume titled Nazareth, he did something no canonical text had ever done. He described those 18 years. He describes Jesus between the ages of 14 and 26 as a skilled craftsman. After his father's death in a construction accident, Jesus became the head of the household. He made deliveries across Galilee. He traveled once to Alexandria. He was skilled in music and drawing. He knew multiple languages, including Greek, which the construction trade in Galilee made nearly unavoidable. Benítez writes of this period, "The Master was in those years everything the Gospels do not tell us. Not hidden, not absent, fully present in the world that would later fill every word he spoke." The Church's response to Benítez was not engagement, it was hostility. A bishop in Monterrey, Mexico, publicly called for his books to be burned. In the 21st century, the instinct to silence hasn't changed, only the methods. Batey the archaeologist and Benítez the investigative journalist, approaching the same question from completely different directions, arrived at the same place. A man formed by his world, walking north every morning to the city 6 kilometers away, learning what he learned the way human beings learn things, by being there. You were taught that those years were blank because they were ordinary, that nothing worth recording happened, that the silence was simply the silence of an unremarkable private life before the ministry began. But here's what I eventually understood. A Jesus formed by experience is a Jesus whose path is open. A man who learned from watching, who developed his theology from what he saw at a job site, who drew his parables from the actual lives of the people who surrounded him. That man's formation doesn't require an institution to explain it, doesn't require a priest to mediate access, doesn't require a theology of miraculous preparation that sets him apart from the human process of becoming. If Jesus learned in the ordinary way, then what he learned is in principle learnable by anyone. That's not a diminishment. That's the most radical claim you can make about him, and it's exactly the claim the official account has worked for 2,000 years to keep you from making. I think about what I should have said to Marcus on that Tuesday in October. Not, "That's a great question. Let me come back to it." What I should have said is, "That's the right question, and the fact that you're the first person to ask it after 11 years in this classroom tells you exactly what this curriculum was built to do." The 47 words are still in Luke, chapter 2. The academic consensus, Ehrman, Meyer, Batey, Myers, is that those years were spent in Galilee, working, walking north to Sepphoris most mornings, learning the world that would later fill every parable he told. There's nothing suppressed about that answer. Nobody burned a document to keep it hidden. The silence was there from the beginning, in the canonical text itself. What the institution suppressed was the question. The question a 14-year-old in the second row asked on a Tuesday afternoon that I, after 11 years, had no answer for. That question is real. It has an answer. The answer is more human and more instructive than any journey to India ever could have been. I'll let you sit with that.